So welcome to Methods Monday today, Monday, April 18th, 2022. We'll be hearing from Ketevan Murusidze and Natia Chankvetadze, presenting on everyday peace indicators, how they've applied that methodology to understanding peace in the Republic of Georgia. So thank you for joining us today. Let me introduce our speakers. And then I think since we have a small group, we'll also hear from each of the people here, just who you are, so that the speakers know who they're speaking to. We have with us today Natia Chankvetadze. She is a doctoral student at the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution here at George Mason University. She's co-author of the project Everyday Peace in Conflict-Affected Societies. And also joining us today, Ketevan Murusidze, or Keti. Keti is a guest lecturer at Tbilisi State University. She's a peace and conflict researcher and also co-author of the project Everyday Peace in Conflict-Affected Societies. So thank you so much, Natia and Keti, for joining us. I'll turn it over to you now. Oh, sorry, and I was just going to say, if others here could just say a quick hello, so that Keti and Natia know who you are. I see some unfamiliar names. Leela, do you want to say hello?
Hi.
Amber? Hi.
Hi, my name is Leela. I'm in unceded Coast Salish territories in Vancouver, Canada. And my background is I have a graduate degree in conflict analysis and management at Royal Roads. Somehow I got on the George Mason University mailing list, and I'm so pleased that I did, because I've been attending a lot of the workshops and just really interested in hearing more about methods.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Amber?
Yes, hello. I'm Amber. Well, Williams now just got married, but I actually work for the Carter School. I'm the events coordinator, so I'm here to join
Amber.
you today.
Thank you for joining, your last name, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And Ibrahim? Okay, he may be offline right now. Okay, so Natia and Keti, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan, a lot for the introduction and for inviting us to talk about the methodology that we did not kind of create it, but we used it in our context. So we prepared a couple slides, and I will share the screen, and then Katie and I will talk about how we adopted this methodology into Georgian context, and how we gathered data and how we analyzed data. This is going to be the kind of two aspects that we will talk about. But first of all, I'm not sure, I know you and Margarita know about the context, but I'm not sure about others if they are familiar with the context that we worked in. So we will just briefly tell you about the context of the research, and then Katie will also speak about the kind of research questions and the guiding questions of the research. So we worked in Georgia. We say the Republic of Georgia to differentiate it from the state of Georgia in the US, and we worked in 7 different locations. And you may like people in the audience may know that Georgia has conflicts in its 2 breakaway regions, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So this research was conducted not only on the controlled territories. You see red dots here, so it's actually pointing the cities, not only the cities, but the municipalities, villages around the cities as well, that we conducted the research. So overall we had the 7 locations, 2 in Abkhazian region, 3 on the Georgian controlled territory currently, and 2 locations in South Ossetia, Yatskhin Valley region. And currently it's these 2 breakaway regions as I said, it's not under Georgian effective control, and effective control it's from Russia has the effective control there. Katie.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Natia, for like giving a brief introduction of the context, because yes, Georgia is a tiny country between these big regional neighbors, and especially in the US, maybe mix it with the state of Georgia. So there are some good anecdotes related to that. But to get back to the our research questions, just to outline, as in many conflict settings, in our context too, conflict is better researched and analyzed than peace. What peace means to people, or what needs to be changed for people to say that there is peace. So we developed this research project with the motivation to explore some of the questions that you can see on the slide, particularly perceptions of and needs for everyday peace in conflict-affected societies in the Georgian, Abkhaz, and South Ossetian contexts. Also to learn more about similarities and differences in their perceptions and needs for peace in these three conflict-divided societies. And also to research key factors influencing everyday peace in conflict-affected societies, especially in our context. And we believe that this research is important not only for understanding these perceptions and needs and for only just research purposes, but it also helps to identify particular needs and interests of local communities that can be effectively used in developing peace-building programs or shaping peace-building and confidence building politics or processes. Yes, Natia.
So we will now speak about mainly methodology, how we gathered the data and analyzed it. But one thing that I also wanted to mention when I was talking about the context is that there is physical boundaries. So it's basically we don't have an access to the open access to these regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So that actually created kind of an additional layer and the challenge for us while we gathered the data. So we adopted the Everyday Peace Indicators project. Here it's the link is inserted. So if we share the presentation after the meeting, so you may look at the Everyday Peace Indicators project. It's Pamina Fisho and Roger McGuinty. They started a kind of I don't think that the everyday peace concept is new thing, just the particularly labeling and calling it Everyday Peace Indicators. And this particular project, this was their initiative, and the way they explain it, it's a participatory research method that they do like work in different societies through focus groups, and they develop, verify, analyze, and then do survey of these indicators. With our context, we did only the first three stages: the development stage, verify, and analysis. We did not do survey. As I said, we don't have access to the breakaway regions, and that the surveys are expensive, but for us this was not only funding, this was also like to keep the methodology more or less kind of similar in all the locations. And if we had the survey, we would not manage to to keep actually the same data gathering, the data analysis methods in all locations, even though we also had to change it a bit. So just very quickly, the next slide shows how the process went in our context, and we used two main data collection methods. This was a key informant interview, semi-structured, and also focus group discussions. This was also kind of a bit different from APIs, how the API project does it, because they rely on focus group discussions only. But we added the key informant interviews, and we did these interviews with actually community leaders, with different people, sometimes city mayors, sometimes doctors, sometimes teachers, like people who we are like actively engaged in the communities. And this is how the process went. Like the first stage was key informant interviews and focus groups, just to gather data to develop indicators. And then second stage for us was we had this list of indicators that we came up with the transcripts from the interview and from focus group transcripts. So we had the second stage, basically going back to the same communities with the same people and also some new people. So the group was a bit mixed, and to talk about these indicators, to vote these indicators, to identify which was, for example, the most important indicator for the municipality or for the location, and discussing whether we identified indicators and interpreted data the way people understood this. So kind of a double checking with them, verifying these EPIs with them. And here, at this, the latest basically the stage that we are at right now, it's the analysis stage. It also mentions here that we, when we were gathering this information, we were doing the focus groups, like one focus group for women, one for young people, one for men, and one mixed group. This is actually from EPI. They do this that way, and we kind of took this approach. And then we may talk about this later on during the questions or the comments or something, but we were talking, for example, about the like facilitating women's focus group and facilitating men's focus group. Like, for example, for women's focus groups, we made sure that groups had women facilitators, that women could speak, but we did not do the same for men's focus group, for example. And that was kind of we had these methodological considerations when we were talking about the EPIs. So this is very briefly like updated information, how many people engaged in the process and how many key informant interviews we've done, like 66, and how many focus groups and how many focus groups while developing the indicators and while verifying these everyday piece indicators. So overall, like 362 people from all these 7 locations, we call them locations, just to ensure the conflict sensitivity, we are engaged in the process. And few more information about the data gathering process that we encountered as kind of for us was a consideration, and also the challenge. We could, even though we kept these developing indicators, like development, verify, analysis stages, we could not apply the same approach to all the 7 locations due to conflict sensitivity. We managed to do the development and verification in 5 locations, 2 in Breakaway region of Abkhazia and 3 Georgian controlled territories, but we could not do this in South Ossetia. And I know Susan and Margarita here, they know very well the context. So we were actually very happy to have the information that we had from South Ossetia, from Akhalgori and Tskhin Valley, because we had enough information, like more actually than we expected, like 20-25 interviews from Akhalgori, and interviews and very small focus groups, like 2, 3, 4 people gathering actually in Tskhin Valley and in different villages around Tskhin Valley. So this one thing that we also kind of mention while we talk about this data gathering was that we still had 2 locations that we could not use the verification. We could not do verification, and we cannot talk about the indicators from that location, which ones are priority for the communities, and we don't talk about these indicators as verified ones, because this is going to be only our interpretation. Another thing that we understood when we were gathering data, it was the importance of facilitation techniques, because we had we realized that because we were not the ones, Katie and I, for example, gathering the data, we had our colleagues, field researchers, that we worked together a lot. Like, we met so many times, sometimes even every second day, to talk about the who could be reached out as a audience, how they would do the discussions, etc., etc. But one thing we did is that we did not give the people questions. Like, we did not tell them these are the questions and you go and you ask these questions and you collect the data. We tell them that these are the conversations, and you ask people about two major things: everyday life and peace in their everyday life. And they had to, and that apparently that required very good facilitation kind of skills from these people, that they could organize the conversations in a way that people were not interviewed, they just engaged in the conversation, but we, at the end of the day, we had the data we could work with. And we understood that development and verification stages, they needed different kind of facilitation, and some field research, and some field researchers actually learned during the process with us as well, that we could not verification stage, it needed more kind of structured and focused facilitation to follow these indicators and to get the to focus the discussions around the indicators. While some field researchers, like, the assumption was that they do the same way. So that was something that we kind of learned throughout the process. And one more thing was the changing language. And again, if you working, I'm sure it's the same with other contexts, but in our context, we worked in 4 different languages. And that was like Georgian, that was Russian, that was Migrilian, that was very like kind of language specific for one region in Abkhazia, and also for on Georgian controlled territory. And we had also the materials in English, like some transcripts. So it was very, very difficult to kind of make sure that people would understand this concept in every language, more or less similar ways. So we had field researchers. We made sure that, for example, field researchers understood like these languages, like local languages, for example, Russian and Migrilian language, and most of us spoke in Georgian, and then all of us understood and spoke in English. So this was something that we struggled with when we gathered the data and when we were getting the transcripts. And the one last thing was also to understand, this was the importance of kind of detailed transcripts, and we were a bit kind of picky about this process, because we asked people very detailed transcript, and sometimes we would get funny like lines in the transcript that was not necessary to be there, but because we were repeating this, that we need detailed transcript, like some people even put like it would be very, very, very entertaining sometimes. But we needed, for example, the body language, because there was this one case when we left one indicator out when we were developing the indicators, and then field researcher noticed this and asked us, where is this indicator? And it appeared, Katie was telling this story often, like it appeared that people, when one person said about this topic, everyone nodded in the room, and it was kind of agreed there. But we could not see this through the transcript, because the fact that everyone nodded, it was not there written. So we understood in a way that it's only one person who said it, and that's it. And we wanted to gather, like when we were identifying indicators, we wanted to make sure that there was like at least half of the people, or like sufficient amount of people, like discussing and identifying this issue as important one. So we were asking like to put the like who would smile, who would nod, who would do some things that we could limit our interpretations as much as it was possible. Yeah, I think this is all, because some stuff that I could say it's more goes with the analysis part that Katie will describe.
Thanks, Natia. Just one thing to add about transcripts. It was very, very important for us to receive this detailed transcript, because due to the context sensitivity and also do no harm principle, we couldn't ask our field researchers to send audio recordings of these interviews and focus group discussions from some of the locations where the issue is very sensitive. So, and we also didn't ask them to take photos, again, due to the conflict sensitivity and do no harm. And that's why we were like really focused on detailed transcripts. And just to say, whenever you do research, you always notice whenever something is missing out from the transcripts or not. And in our case, we were really lucky with our collaboration with local researchers, because all the transcripts were super detailed. As Natia mentioned, some of these sections were kind of anecdotal even. Anyway, through this process that Natia explained, we managed to identify 159 EPIs at the development stage. And then we took this list of indicators back to the communities. In this case, we tried to gather a larger group of focus groups. Some of them were participating in the first wave of focus groups, but others did not. So we tried to understand different perspectives as well. So in the verification focus group, we managed to verify 87 indicators out of this 159 indicators. And as Natia mentioned, in these verified indicators, we do not include the 2 locations where we couldn't conduct this verification process. The one important thing that we noticed was that people who participated in the verification focus group really enjoyed that. They really enjoyed that indicators were preserving local voices, and the indicators were not kind of framing the issues in a very as we say in Georgia, very NGO language, or the language that local students understand. That's why this was one of the ways that the research got trust and acceptance from the local communities, kind of contributing to greater participation and more meaningful discussions at the verification stage. Then we, at first stage as well as the second stage, we used a thematic analysis method of coding system in this MaxQDA kind of software, which was very helpful for all of us, especially for collaborations, because for 4 people, Natia, myself, and 2 other researchers were collaborating in the system, so it was very helpful. Just to outline, in the open coding system, we meant that we did not predefine any of the categories for the research. Also, we are part of this society, and obviously we had some kind of expectations of what kind of issues might come up from the research. We intentionally did not define any categories. We completely relied on the data that we collected, and data guided us in terms of identifying categories that you can see on this screen, which is like a security, mobility, war, confidence building, and peace processes, and etc. So all of these categories were taken from the transcripts and from the data that we collected. And each section of the transcript, of all transcripts, are actually kind of coded either only in one category or in several categories. So some issues were kind of bridging between 2 or 3 categories some of the time. So we managed to capture all of them in this process. Natia, can you? And in the process of data analysis, we adopted kind of several approaches that helped us a lot, but we obviously faced some of the challenges that Natia mentioned, and I will also discuss and share with you. And it will be very interesting to hear your comments and feedback on this process as well. So for this particular research project, we needed 2 stages of analysis. The first stage was to identify and develop these everyday peace indicators and the first list of indicators that we took back to the local communities for verification. And then the second stage involves analyzing verified indicators, kind of understanding why this in particular indicator was a priority for this group of people or for this region. So this is the second stage of analysis. And in this process, we greatly relied on the participatory approach, which involved 2 kind of layers. The first layer was this verification focus group that we used for analysis as well, because at the verification focus groups, people were first voting for the most priority indicators for them. And then we had the discussion about these indicators and why some of the indicators got the most vote while others didn't get any vote, or etc. There were some also we say women-focused indicators or women-raised indicators. we also tried to discuss these indicators at the verification stage. It helped us to collect interpretation from the local communities, so that Natia and I, who are basically drafting these reports, do rely on them and their interpretation rather than ours, because in some of the locations, maybe we do have an efficient knowledge of local culture and customs, but in some of the areas, like in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, we do know these regions to some extent, but none of us, neither Natia or I've been there. So we understand that there might be some local kind of context or local interpretation of things that might be different than our own interpretation. So we try to have this very participatory approach in this process. And on that, we also relied greatly on our local researchers. And as Natia mentioned, we had countless consultations with them, helping them to explain particular things in this process of analysis, as well as while drafting kind of key findings for each location. With first people who receive this first draft is our local researchers, so that they note and give us feedback if there is something misinterpreted or if there is something missing, and etc. So this collaboration really worked well, and it was very helpful for all of us. In terms of the data analysis and what kind of, Natia mentioned that we had two major questions guiding this research process. One was about everyday life, and another was how people perceive peace, or what they need for peace in their daily life. And we found out that some of the issues they discussed were just priority issues. And to distinguish priority issues from the ones that we call everyday peace indicators, we only put it in the list of everyday peace indicators, the ones that people themselves connected with peace, whether they were saying that peace is to me when something. So this way we tried to be very kind of clear about what people were connecting to peace and how. Also, as mentioned, it was very, very interesting for us to hear that all the everyday peace indicators that we identified and took back to the communities, either for verification stage or at a later stage when we presented these indicators and the research findings to the local communities, people were saying that all of these indicators are relevant. None of them are kind of brought upon them or not relevant for their community. So that was very interesting. However, it is kind of challenging at the same time to preserve this local voices, which is one of the key kind of principle for us, but at the same time to translate or communicate these indicators to the different target groups and different stakeholders who might use these indicators in their either programming or policy shaping process or etc. So this is something that we are kind of trying to balance through communication with our local researchers, as well as through the discussion between us. At the same time, we noticed that obviously everybody knows that peace is a very complex concept. And our research also captured this complexity, which is on the one hand good because it captures the reality on the ground, but on the other hand, it is also kind of challenging because we talk about everyday peace indicators. And when we talk about indicators are supposed to measure one thing if we want to make it measurable and useful in a monitoring and evaluation process. So this is kind of challenging in that sense to both capture this complexity and at the same time take on board these several interpretations of APIs. Just to bring an example, for example, in some of the locations, people connected peace and everyday peace to inner peace. And while they were kind of interpreting what inner peace means to them, they often refer to the development in the society, social political dynamics, economic dimensions, and etc., as well as the sense of safety and security. So the inner peace, one indicator for inner peace captures various areas in the society. Also, in terms of interconnectedness, many indicators were connected to each other, which obviously is kind of natural. And this is how we live. Different factors are connecting to each other. That's why like a system thinking helps us in this process. But yeah, at the same time, it kind of shows imposes some challenges. In terms of interconnectedness, for example, security and stability issues related to security and stability were the most interconnected. For example, people say that peace is when they do not hold back building a house due to the fear of a breakout of a war. On the one hand, there is a security challenge. On the other hand, there is also instability in our daily life that we all experience, especially nowadays, since the latest development in the region. So this different interpretation of one indicator is a kind of challenge for us. But as we stick to the only qualitative research within this project, we are kind of fine with that, so that we show the complexity of peace and everyday peace for conflict-affected communities to a larger audience. Also, obviously, in any kind of research, you want to have something to compare to. Thankfully, we had many indicators and many issues and categories that were relevant to different locations. The issues, for example, related to mobility, freedom of movement. However, even the same issue was kind of differently understood in different societies, considering the implications of conflict on their daily life. For example, for those who are divided by the conflict line, the issue of mobility is related to crossing this conflict line. But for those who are limited to international travels, for them, freedom of movement is mainly connected to this issue. So the issue might be the same, but it could be differently understood depending on the context and depending the relation of the process to the conflict. Also, for example, in many locations, sounds and, for example, sounds of shootings or sounds of fireworks was inciting fear of war. That was kind of seen in all the different locations. That was interesting to us. And obviously, issues related to stability and security were the ones common for all locations. However, we definitely had some indicators unique for the particular location. And once you collect this data, then you are kind of, at least we as researchers were willing to have more information about this particular indicator from other locations. But you cannot really do much since you rely on the information and issues that local communities provide and identify. So if they didn't identify this issue, you do not intervene to ask specifically about how this issue is perceived in their communities. So that was interesting observation for us, as well as for analysis. And obviously, as in any context, understanding local customs and traditions were particularly important in this context. Some of the indicators were kind of specifying, for example, people were not wearing black outfits was one of the indicators for peace, which has very close ties with the local traditions. When we grieve our lost ones, we usually wear black. So this indicator is very relevant for our society, but those who do not know about this tradition or do not know the importance of this tradition might do not take this indicator seriously. Also, drinking coffee for some of the location is something very kind of close to their daily routine. And if this practice is interrupted, then it is not peace for them. So drinking coffee for some might be kind of anecdotal indicator for peace, but for these locations, it was very relevant. And actually it came up quite a lot in different locations here. As we mentioned, conflict sensitivity and do no harm principle was something that we were really careful about and considering at every stage of the process. And obviously it also is considered during the data analysis and report writing process. We try to use careful wordings and interpretations so that nobody gets harmed out of this process. And also due to the conflict as well as geopolitical dynamics in the region, our communication with field researchers are to some extent interrupted time by time. So it affects the feedback loop that we adopted and used so effectively. In the advocacy meeting, we also noticed that some of the APIs that we identified during the research process last year could have a slightly different meaning nowadays due to the war in Ukraine and its implications on our society. Unfortunately, we are not able to capture these differences because the research process ended last year in December. But during the advocacy meetings just a few weeks ago, when we were discussing research findings with the local community members, we kind of identified this issue. And this is kind of limitation that we face. And the last thing that I want to outline is that we noticed that EPI methodology can be also used as a confidence building tool. First and foremost, because we kind of collaborated in the process. We collaborated with local researchers from different sides of conflict divides. So it helped us to understand a bit more about each other's societies and learn about each other's struggles and perceptions of peace. So that was a very interesting process, and for some eye-opening process in terms of noticing that despite this division and isolations of several decades, people on different sides of conflict divides sometimes have very similar understanding of peace and needs for peace. So that was very interesting. And also we noticed that during the research process, while we gathered together people from one municipality, but from urban and rural settings, people who live close to the conflict line and those who live in the regional centers, they also need some communication and understanding of each other's realities. So intra-societal discussions were also very interesting part of the process. And we take this everything into account while analyzing the data, because some of the indicators that mainly come from the urban setting might have different understanding and different interpretations, while those coming from the villages close to the conflict line might have different interpretations and understanding. So all of these are very important to take into account while working with the data and analyzing them. Otherwise, we believe that we miss out some of the very important information and insights that we can bring kind of outline as local researchers, which is one of the kind of advantage of this project, that whole research process is conducted by local researchers in collaborations with very, very local field researchers. So this is from my end, and Natia, if you'd like to add something, or then we can hear your questions, your comments or recommendations.
Yeah, it's better I stop sharing. No, I don't think I need to add anything, just because last point about the confidence building tool, often research is taken very kind of an isolated from confidence building process, and that's not true, because this helps actually very much confidence building process. I don't know in this group who needs this explanation, but this is what we learned. And we had actually one thing that we did. One of our researchers came up with the idea, let's do the quiz with the indicators. And we thought this is kind of like taking the indicator and asking, what do you think, which location came up with this indicator? And we were like very skeptical. I was very skeptical, if I speak for myself. I was like, that could be tricky, that could be sensitive, people can get upset. And people enjoyed so much. They were like, and you could also see the perceptions, because I remember several times that every indicator that spoke about something bad, some people from the other side would label it to Tbilisi. Oh, that's gonna be in Tbilisi. So you could see perceptions, like how they perceive locations where what is happening. And then it would end up being the indicator of his or his own location, and they would be confused. And this was actually something that we played with, to tell them that we have a lot of similarities and the one problem can happen in everywhere. And several of them said that the list of indicators, like basically this one page long document, we are very informative for them. And they said that they never thought how people perceived peace in Zugdidi or in Gori or in Ahalgori. They never thought about it. And this kind of this list was, as Katie mentioned, this word eye-opening for them, like, see, maybe how I perceive peace in my daily life could be absolutely identical. Dia as well. And I was speaking somewhere else, I think, about these results, and two things we are repeating in every location, like in all 7 locations. This was freedom of movement and the fear of war. So nobody in this in our context can claim that this is an issue for them only. It's everyone's kind of problem. So I don't know if anyone has any comment, any question that we can tell more.
Thank you for this lovely presentation, and yeah, let's transition to any comments or questions. I see some applause there from Ibrahim and Dr. Ketevan.
Thank you so much. Really very informative and very interesting. I have 2 kind of questions. One is, I've never used myself the peace indicators as everyday peace indicators as a methodology. So I wonder, based on your experience, if you feel that it can be a time comparative tool in terms of does it allow space for you to ask questions? What was peace for you, let's say 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and what it means now? Trying to understand if there is a shift in perceptions, especially, well, in this region, things are evolving currently. So do you feel that the methodology allows for that type of kind of approach for the research?
You said 2 questions. It's
the second one. I was wondering. You mentioned that you were not able to gauge the perceptions comparing to Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, because you finished the data collection before it started, but it was in the time when the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict has already kind of finished. And I was wondering if you were able to identify any, because again, like Armenian Karabakh is in more closer proximity to the region, and also the entities that you were surveying had kind of similar status and similar fears in one way or another. So I was wondering if that was captured at all in your data.
Yeah. Katie, do you want to? Maybe I can respond the first and or say in your second. I don't know. That's like about the change. That's an interesting question, because I think the PI method itself, how they do this, they ask about the change. Exactly, they use at least I remember from Roger, because we were consulting with him time to time. So they when they ask about the peace, they ask about change. Exactly. So like what changed in your society and how you see this change. And that's in this way they try to kind of come up with the indicators. In our context, there was the indicators that, or the discussions that showed the change in kind of people. We are like if people were afraid of something, for example, 10 years ago, or it was like something different, then it changed. So they were talking about change in not only because the change in perception actually comes because the environment changes, context somehow changes. So yeah, just simply speaking, we had discussions about what has changed and how exactly, and how you capture this change, so that we could speak about the indicator that was speaking about this change, if it makes sense. Yeah, but one thing we also say is that it would be very, very, very useful to do this similar research, let's say in 5 years. You use the indicators we have now and don't reference them, just compare if the perception of peace and like the need for peaceful everyday life somehow changed.
Thank you. Thank you. Useful discussion there. I was interested in your presenting the everyday peace indicators as a confidence building methodology, that the methods for discussing everyday peace indicators is a method of also building confidence, particularly when Georgian researchers are working with Abkhaz researchers and South Ossetian researchers in collaboration to do this. And I wonder if you could say more about that and kind of envision what would be kind of next steps, not as research for this, because I noticed you had kind of the linear process. The EPI normally would have a survey come next. But if you look at this as a practice of what you're doing is bridging across the conflict divide between researchers to consider what does peace look like, that what would come next in your practice of peace building work, if this was a peace building practice project more than a research project.
Okay, I will try to answer to the second questions Dr. Margarita posed, and just add one more thing about Natia's comment about the time changes. Actually, what we noticed is that in their conversations, people put some time frames and divide times between this event or another. And one of these kind of dividing lines that they refer to for comparison are usually the conflicts like 2008, before 2008, and after that, in the 90s, before the 90s and after 90s. So this kind of time changes, this point of kind of observing changes of public perception of peace over the time really can be done using this tool. And yeah, we also wish to be able to conduct this research in a after 3 years or 5, let's say. I mean, it depends on not only resources, but in the local conflict situation. And in terms of Ukraine war and the reference to Nagorno-Karabakh war, we didn't have a direct indication to what extent the conflict, kind of second war in Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020 influenced public perception of peace in these regions. But we could notice that in some of the locations, especially in the locations from the breakaway regions, people had kind of more immediate concerns about the escalation of war, and they kind of perceived that the Georgian side might start a war or something like that. And I assume, this is kind of my assumption, that this might be influenced by the war in Nagorno-Karabakh and what happened and how the actors played out in the processes in 2020. So that definitely kind of, in my understanding, that would definitely have some kind of implications about the security or the sense of security or insecurity. But nowadays, I guess all of us are super alert, and our sense of security is super alert. So it would be very interesting to know how people perceive the similar issues nowadays. In terms of confidence building tools, I would say that, and maybe Natia, you can also add, it is a very good question what comes next, because these connections are there. We have very good collaboration, and as of our observation, it was definitely confidence building within our team. Just an example that Natia brought, this everyday peace quiz that was played within this group of researchers when we were able to meet in person. So that was very interesting to observe how our perceptions change about different locations where we have access to or not. What can be the next step? Is very difficult to answer at this point because of the situation that we live here. But there are some ideas. Once we were discussing this, how to use these research findings in the best way possible, we came up with some ideas. One was to conduct similar research after a few years, that we will keep this connection, as well as kind of have a point for comparison. Also, we thought about to research in depth some of the issues identified in some of the locations. So again, we are kind of circling around research and using research as a confidence building tool, but actually it was very good experience for us. We worked and collaborated for around 10 months in a way that some of us have never met each other in person. we started collaboration online, and it was very useful to focus on research rather than conflict. It was kind of a little bit distancing from research, although the whole research was about peace, and peace in our context is kind of determined by conflict that we have. But I mean, that was kind of distancing from conflict and trying to look at this process as researchers and discuss all of this in a very sensitive, but at the same time in a very kind of friendly manner. That was helpful. So I would keep this approach for the future collaborations as well. But we, at the latest discussions that we had, we also noticed that the connections and confidence that we built can be helpful to discuss the issues of current concern, meaning the conflict in Ukraine. Since we do trust each other, we understand each other to some extent, we know each other's work ethic and how we approach things, how we care about each other, and the trust has been built through how we dealt with the information that they provided, how we ask for their feedback, and etc. So this trust, as this understanding, is here. So nowadays we use it for understanding the dynamics that we have in the context. There is a huge misinformation, propaganda, not misinformation, basically disinformation and propaganda going on from different sides, including in the country locally. So to double check some information, to understand why people talk about this issue or another, we use this space for this kind of communication, and we try to engage other people with similar approach to understanding the local dynamics. So these are some of the ideas that we think about and kind of use in practice. But for a future project, it's very difficult to talk about anything at this moment because we don't know how this conflict will be. I don't know how the dynamic goes on.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I really appreciate the kind of clarity that research is a confidence building approach. Because I've seen it that way in my own work and working with Margarita Tadavosian. We've engaged with research as a confidence building measure, and also the Institute for Multi-Track Diplomacy has the research in the academic area as one of the tracks of multi-track diplomacy. So great to see you all doing that. I want to pause and see. I have a couple other questions myself, but I want to make space for any of the others. If Lida, Ibrahim, or Margarita have other comments or questions. Okay, well, if you think of one, let me know. But in the meanwhile, I want to ask about, you mentioned your innovation with the Everyday Peace Indicators methodology. Instead of doing only focus groups, you also did interviews. And I'm interested, particularly because last Monday we had our Methods Monday presentation, which focused on interviews as a methodological approach. And I would be interested to hear you kind of compare and contrast your key informant interviews with your focus group discussions in terms of what kinds of input and insights you gained from the interviews compared to the focus group discussions, and how you look at the strengths of each of those. If you're talking to a researcher who's considering, should I do interviews or should I do focus groups or should I do both? What would you advise how people make that decision?
Maybe I can start with this. That's a very kind of a critical question for us too, because as we said that we went with the local leaders, and we kind of said that the leaders are people who go to communities, and then at some places it was really teachers, and some places was like doctors. These are people who go, like the doctor is who is going, all the like, or NGO leaders or some other people. I would say that it's important to do both of them, because with the focus group discussions, I don't like this word ordinary, and it's like so-called ordinary people, sort of, but people who do not necessarily work in any CBO or NGO, or who are not like who is like the farmer, housewife, shop consultant, people who just live their daily lives. So through focus group discussions, we tried to bring people who just lived their daily lives in these locations. There were some, of course, like, for example, a teacher, or like we had some small social enterprise, some like different things, but that was main focus. And then one thing that we were even seeing the difference in languages, how they would describe something and how they would talk about something. And that was when Katie was talking about this analysis part, like when we were doing the indicators, we did not reformulate, but we did not make it more academic, more professionalized. We kept exactly the way it was said. And we had the trouble with translation. That's why in some cases we have like English/Georgian, English/Russian, because in English you can't really translate everything the way to keep authenticity. So for us it was kind of interviews were important, and they were kind of added value for focus group discussions. And then we could see that there were topics like the indicators that the interviews mentioned and the focus groups repeated. And there were cases when there was issues that interviews mentioned, but were not repeated in focus group discussions. And that was kind of surprising, because these people worked on these topics and they understood they as important ones. But when it comes to the everyday life, people talk different things. Like none of the interviews mentioned, for example, in Zugdidi, stray dogs. And focus group spoke stray dogs because it apparently interrupts their daily peace. And they don't see this as they see some more structural kind of more systemic problem. So I would say, yeah, it's complementary, but in South Ossetia, like in Akhalgori, we had only interviews. And these interviews via the kind of a similar like sketch, similar questions, and then our our colleague who would go and do interviews, she was going like village by village and meeting like one person and talking to that person. So that was more kind of we gathered more kind of life stories, how everyday life is happening there for people with different backgrounds. And it was like some could be again teacher and some could be farmer living in a village in a Akhalgori district. So, and then we could see how they organize their daily life, what it affects, and see some similarities and differences. But these transcripts for me are kind of stories that you can treat them as stories, and you can actually as narratives as well. So you can use them and analyze them with different techniques, not only with the thematic analysis. You can use narrative analysis and do something else with the same data. Yeah, I just looked at the time and it's already 12:55. So
yeah, it's time for us to conclude, but I do see Ibrahim. Maybe Ibrahim, we give you the last word just for 1 minute, please.
Okay, I have just a short and practical question that I'm wondering. Did you provide any incentives for the participants? I mean, because I tried to do similar kind of research, and it was so trouble for me to find some participants without incentives. I don't know whether it's a proper question. I'm just wondering that.
Absolutely, the practical questions matter too. Natia or Keti?
Yeah, in our case, that's a very good question, because we discussed it a lot when we were planning our field work, and actually at different locations that could work differently. Most of the time we were against of kind of handing over some amount of money to the participants, because this was kind of ethical issue, and also we might put some people in uncomfortable situation considering how receiving money is perceived in our context. We also do understand that in some of the research projects you might not have enough funding to kind of use this opportunity this way. So we decided not to do that. But what we did was that we covered their transportation fee. We provided maybe sometimes like a small useful souvenirs or stuff like that for them. And we also used an opportunity and offered to top up their mobile accounts because of the communication. So that was not direct way of handing over money, but it was still kind of incentive. But
what kind of accounts were those? Sorry, I
like
didn't understand.
popping up their like a
mobile, gotcha. The mobile phone accounts.
Yes, just like small amount, but still. But most of the time we used we covered their transportation fees because people were coming from different villages and etc. So etc. And I guess Natia is about to say what I said, just providing some refreshments during the focus group discussions, etc. But there was also a case when one of the respondents, but in the case of interview, herself served with chocolates and etc. So it wasn't only one way around.
Nice.
But in most of the cases, they didn't really need incentives, I guess, because we to some extent relied on the network of our local researchers, and this could be also the reason for that. Do you remember any other case, Natia?
No, I remember that we considered capital as the easiest place to do the work, and it appeared to be the most difficult. It appeared that all of us, including some of our friends and colleagues, we were all tried to, even the incentives did not work in the capital. So because we worked with the IDP community, and then one of the kind of lessons learned for us was that apparently not many people go there for the. It's more kind of politicized for them to go to the IDP settlement. So we faced this issue that the context decided if incentive worked or not. But as Katie said, transportation money was something that we said that we will pay it. Like if you come here, or like we will ensure that you don't have to pay for this, that you come to attend and you have like water, coffee, something to be there for 2 hours. Like that was it.
Actually, for verification, it was much easier to organize focus group discussions, especially those who participate in the first wave, because some of the people were asking to receive more information about the research. And when they got the chance to get back for verification and as well as for advocacy meetings, we call it advocacy meeting. Basically, it's discussion around the research findings with these people. So it was very easy to gather these people for this second and third wave, I guess, due to their interest to talk about peace, because this is very unusual for them. Most of the researchers ask about conflicts, ask about political, or religious, or ethnic issues. So that was kind of new thing for them to speak about peace.
I see. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate Natia and Keti. You're making the time for this presentation, and those of you who've shown up and been a part of the discussion. And Leela, I think I see your comment and your thanks in the chat, and really appreciate everyone being here. We're going to conclude today's Method Monday, and I just want to highlight that next week we have a Method Monday with Dr. Peter Coleman from Columbia University. He'll be speaking about the methodologies used in the Difficult Conversations Lab, looking at what works for effective approaches to difficult conversations and the methodologies they use there. So please tune in next Monday at noon also. Thank you all so much. I'm going to close the recording out.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks a lot.